The great hall of the alien citadel was filled with cold light. Tall pillars stretched into the shadows, and the throne of the alien lord shone with silver fire. He sat there, eyes like burning coals, and his voice thundered across the chamber. Before him stood his daughter, small and fragile compared to the towering figures around her. Her armor was loose on her thin body. Her hands trembled as she tried to keep them steady. The warriors of the court whispered among themselves, mocking her weakness. To them, she was not a warrior, not even worthy to carry the blood of their lord. "You are no daughter of mine," the alien lord declared, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You are weak, unworthy, and shameful to this house. From this day forward, you are cast out." The princess lowered her head, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to show. Her father's words were heavier than chains, crushing the hope she once carried. She had always tried to please him, to prove herself strong, but nothing was ever enough. Now she was nothing more than a shadow, a failure in the eyes of her own people. The guards dragged her out of the hall and threw her into the cold wilderness beyond the city walls. The ground was harsh, the air thin, the sky covered in strange stars that offered no comfort. She had no food, no weapon, no companion. The only thing she carried was the pain of rejection. For days she wandered, her steps slow, her body weakening. Each night, she cried silently under the strange alien moons. She thought of her father's face, stern and unyielding, and the mocking voices of the court. Her spirit was breaking, and she wondered if her story would end in silence, forgotten by all. But fate had other plans. On the seventh day, as her strength faded and her legs collapsed beneath her, she saw movement in the distance. It was not an alien beast, nor a warrior from her father's empire. It was a figure unlike any she had seen before. A man, walking through the wilderness with steady steps, his form smaller than the towering aliens, but carrying himself with a quiet strength. The human stopped when he saw her, his eyes narrowing in concern. He approached slowly, scanning the horizon for danger. When he reached her side, he crouched down, offering her a drink from the canteen he carried. She looked at him in confusion, not understanding why a stranger would help her. In her world, weakness was despised, and kindness was rare. "Drink," the human said simply, his voice calm. She obeyed, the water burning her dry throat. For the first time in days, warmth touched her body. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. The human studied her, noticing the faint marks of nobility on her armor, though it was torn and broken. "You're not safe out here alone," he said. "Come with me." She stared at him, disbelief flooding her heart. Why would he care? Why would he not leave her to die as her own people had? But in his eyes, she saw something she had never seen in her father's. Mercy. The choice was simple: die alone, or follow the strange human who offered a hand when no one else had. With trembling legs, she rose, leaning on him for support. Together, they walked into the wilderness, the alien princess and the human stranger. She did not know his name, nor his purpose. But deep inside, a spark flickered in her heart, a spark that whispered she had not been abandoned by fate, that perhaps her story was not ending, but only beginning. As the night sky stretched above them, filled with silent stars, the princess walked beside the human. She was still weak, still broken, but she no longer walked alone. And though she could not see it yet, this moment was the first step toward her legend. The desert winds carried sharp grains of dust across the barren land. The alien princess walked slowly, her legs weak, but the human stayed by her side, steady and calm. Every step reminded her of the life she had lost, the throne room, the burning eyes of her father, the cruel laughter of the warriors. And now, only this stranger kept her moving. The human was unlike any being she had ever seen. He was shorter than her people, but his presence felt larger. He wore no shining armor, no crest of noble blood, only simple gear carried with quiet confidence. He had no aura of arrogance, no pride of empire, but when he walked, it was with purpose, as if every step had meaning. The princess studied him in silence, but fear sat heavy in her heart. What if he left her like her father had? What if he grew tired of her weakness and cast her aside into the dust? Her people had shown her no mercy. Why would this human be different? That night, they found shelter in the ruins of an old outpost, broken walls half buried in sand. The human built a small fire, its glow painting his face in warm light. He placed a small portion of food before her, something he had saved from his pack. "You need strength," he said simply. His words were few, but his actions spoke louder than the proud speeches of her father's counsel. She hesitated before eating, guilt twisting in her chest. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why do you help me, human? I am nothing, weak, useless." The human looked at her for a long moment, then answered with quiet steel in his tone. "Because weakness is not the end, because no one deserves to die alone." His words struck her harder than her father's rejection. For the first time, someone saw her not as a failure, but as someone worth saving. She turned away quickly, hiding the tears in her eyes. That night, she could not sleep, haunted by the strange power of his mercy. The days that followed were filled with struggle. The human pushed her to walk farther, to climb harsh cliffs, to fight exhaustion with grit. When she stumbled, he pulled her up. When she complained, he ignored the words and made her keep moving. His training was not cruel, but it was relentless. Each task forced her body to grow stronger, her heart to beat with stubborn fire. Still, doubt lingered. One evening, after a long march, she collapsed near the riverbed they had found. "I cannot do this," she gasped, her body trembling. "I will only slow you down. Leave me here, human, continue without me." The human crouched before her, his face hard with determination. "Your father cast you aside because he could not see the fire inside you," he said. "But I see it, you will rise. You only have to choose to fight." His words burned in her mind. For so long, she had believed she was worthless, but now the choice was placed before her: to give in and die in the dust, or to rise with the strength he offered. Something stirred deep inside her, something she had never felt before: hope. That night, as the stars shone cold and bright above them, she made her decision. She would follow him, she would endure, and she would not let her story end as her father wished. The human had given her more than food and water. He had given her a reason to live. From that moment on, every step she took carried a new weight. The weight of choice, the weight of destiny. And though she stumbled and faltered, she did not give up. The human walked beside her, silent but steady, his eyes always watching, always measuring. He was shaping her into something her people could never imagine. In the ruins of her exile, the first sparks of her legend were born, not through bloodlines or thrones, not through noble titles, but through the simple choice of a human who refused to abandon her. The abandoned princess had found her guide, and the universe itself would one day tremble because of the path they now walked together. The mornings in the barren lands were cruel. The wind cut like knives, and the ground was as hard as iron. The alien princess woke shivering, her body aching from the endless march, but the human was already awake, standing tall against the rising sun. He carried no crown, no armor of power, yet there was authority in his silence, a command that came not from bloodline, but from sheer will. "Up," he said firmly, tossing her a wooden staff he had shaped the night before. Her hands trembled as she caught it, the weight pulling her arms down. "What is this for?" she asked, her voice weak. "To fight," he answered simply, his eyes steady. "Your people threw you away because they believed you weak, but weakness can be burned out. Strength is built, not given." The training began with pain. At first, she could not lift the staff for long, her arms shaking until they dropped it into the dust. He made her pick it up again, and again, and again, until her hands were raw and her breath came in gasps. She cried out, begged to stop, but he only shook his head. "You will thank the pain," he said. "Pain is proof you are changing." They walked miles each day, not just to travel, but to test her endurance. When her legs gave way, he forced her to rise. When her spirit faltered, he spoke few but sharp words that cut deeper than a blade. Do you want to live as your father named you? Weak? Or do you want to show him he was wrong? At night, when they stopped to rest, he taught her more. How to hold her stance, how to balance her weight, how to strike without fear. At first her movements were clumsy, every swing of the staff too slow, too soft. But with each failure, he corrected her, his patience endless, his eyes sharp. She began to feel muscles she never knew existed. She began to feel strength grow in her hands. One evening, as the fire crackled low, she sat staring at her reflection in a pool of water. Her face was still the same, the daughter who had been thrown away, but her eyes were changing. There was no longer only sorrow, there was a faint spark of fire. She whispered to herself, "I will not be forgotten. I will not die nameless." The human watched her quietly, saying nothing, but a faint smile touched his lips. He had seen that spark before, in soldiers who rose from nothing to greatness. He knew the princess had begun to climb her path. The days blurred into weeks, each harder than the last. She learned to run across rocky hills, her breath heavy but steady. She learned to fight with staff and with fists, each strike carrying more power than the one before. And most of all, she learned to endure, to silence the voice in her head that whispered she was worthless. Still, she was not ready, and the human knew it. One night, he spoke as they sat beneath the cold, alien stars. "You think strength is in your arms, but true strength lives in your mind. The moment you believe you are beaten, you will be—" She listened, her heart burning with both shame and determination. She wanted to prove him wrong, to prove to herself she could rise. The first test came sooner than expected. While they crossed the ravine, shadows moved in the distance, eyes glinting in the dark. The human raised his hand, signaling silence. Out of the rocks came creatures, half beast, half machine, predators that hunted the weak. The princess froze, her staff shaking in her hands, terror flooding her chest. The human stepped forward, his voice low but strong. "Remember what I taught you. This is no training now. This is survival." The beasts charged, their metal claws scraping the ground. The human fought with fierce precision, striking fast, his every move practiced. But one beast broke past him, lunging straight for the princess. Her mind screamed to run, but her legs held, her arms lifted the staff. The impact nearly threw her down, but she swung, striking its head with all the force she could muster. The creature staggered, sparks flying, and for the first time she felt the thrill of victory in her chest. The battle ended, the beast driven back into the night. She stood panting, her hands bleeding, her arms heavy as stone. But her eyes shone bright. She had not run, she had not broken, she had fought. The human looked at her with quiet pride. "You are not the same girl who was cast out," he said, and though she was still far from ready, she believed him. The path ahead was long, the trials endless, but the fire had been lit. The abandoned princess was no longer only surviving, she was beginning to fight, and the universe was beginning to take notice. The morning was silent, too silent. The alien princess felt the unease in her bones as she and the human moved through the dry valley. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Her grip tightened around the staff the human had given her, now worn smooth by endless training. She had grown stronger over the past weeks, her strikes faster, her endurance longer, her mind steadier. But doubt still lived in the corners of her heart, whispering she would never be enough. The human seemed to sense this, though he said nothing. He simply walked ahead with calm steps, scanning the cliffs above. He knew something was coming. The attack began without warning. From the shadows of the rocks, alien raiders emerged, armored and armed with blades that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their eyes burned with hunger for blood, their voices sharp as they shouted war cries. The princess froze, fear surging inside her, memories of her father's court flooding back. The laughter, the words of weakness. She felt her legs weaken, but then the human's voice cut through her fear. "Stand, this is your trial, fight or fall." The raiders charged, their weapons flashing. The human leapt into the fray, moving with precision and speed, his strikes calculated, every blow knocking an enemy aside. But there were too many, and some broke past him, rushing straight for the princess. Her heart pounded in her chest, her grip tight on the staff, her mind screaming to run. But she remembered his words, his relentless training, the nights of pain that taught her strength. She forced her legs to stay, forced her arms to lift. The first raider lunged, its blade cutting the air toward her head. With a cry, she swung her staff, the wood cracking against the warrior's arm. The blade dropped, the raider staggered, and the shock of her own strength filled her with fire. Another came, larger, fiercer. This time she did not wait. She stepped forward, driving the staff into its chest, pushing with every ounce of will. It stumbled back, surprised, and for the first time she saw fear in an enemy's eyes. Still, the battle was chaos. The human fought like a storm, his movements sharp and endless, but he could not shield her forever. A third raider broke through, striking hard, knocking her to the ground. Her staff rolled away, and the alien's blade hovered above her, ready to fall. Her heart screamed with terror, her body frozen. But then she heard the human shout her name, not in anger, but in command, in trust. And something inside her broke free. With a cry, she reached for the fallen blade of the first raider. It was heavy, almost too heavy for her arms, but she raised it, blocking the strike. The clash rang through the valley, sparks flying. Her arms shook, her strength failing, but she pushed, her eyes burning with rage and defiance. With a final scream, she drove the blade upward, striking into the raider's chest. The warrior collapsed, its eyes wide with shock, and silence fell around her. For a moment, everything slowed. Her breath came in gasps, her arms heavy, her hands bloody. She had killed, not out of hatred, but out of survival. And in that moment, she felt a truth settle in her heart. She was no longer the weak daughter cast aside. She was a fighter. The remaining raiders, seeing her stand bloodied but unbroken, hesitated. The human pressed the attack, driving them back until they fled into the shadows from which they had come. When the dust settled, he turned to her, his eyes steady but not unkind. "You stood," he said, "you fought." She could not answer, her throat too tight with emotion. Tears fell down her face, but they were not only of fear. They were of pride, of proof that she had survived her first trial. She picked up the staff again, her hands trembling, but her grip firm. The human nodded once, satisfied. "You are not weak," he said quietly. "Remember this day, for it is the first step of many." That night, as they sat by the fire, the stars seemed brighter. The princess stared into the flames, replaying the battle again and again in her mind. She still felt fear, still felt doubt, but now she carried something greater. A memory of victory, proof that she was not helpless, proof that she could fight. And deep inside, a new fire grew. For the first time in her life, she believed she could rise beyond the shadow of her father's throne. The first trial was complete, and though more trials waited in the dark future, she had taken her place on the path to legend. The fire from the last battle still burned in the princess's memory. She had faced death and lived. She had struck down an enemy with her own hands. But the victory was more than survival. It was the first proof that she was not the weak child her father had called her. And as she walked beside the human through the endless alien lands, she carried herself taller, her steps firmer, her eyes sharper. The human noticed the change, but said little. He did not praise her with grand words. He simply trained her harder. Each morning began with drills, her staff cutting through the air, her arms aching. Each night ended with lessons, how to fight with strategy, how to see not just the enemy in front of her, but the field around her. The training was merciless, but it forged her like fire forges steel. Word of her survival began to spread across the wastelands, carried by whispers of raiders who had fled in shame. They spoke of the abandoned daughter who now fought with fire in her eyes. Some laughed, thinking it a joke. Others grew uneasy, wondering if weakness could truly be turned to strength. And in the heart of the Empire, the alien lord himself heard the rumors. He dismissed them at first, but a shadow of doubt stirred in his mind. He had cast her aside to erase her, but instead her name was returning like an echo he could not silence. The princess, however, thought little of the whispers. Her world was the road, the battles, the fire of each lesson burned into her muscles. Yet she could feel something stirring in her heart, something larger than survival. It was courage, not just to fight but to stand, to believe. Her courage was tested when they reached the ruined settlement at the edge of the desert. Once it had been a small village, but now it lay broken, its walls shattered, its streets empty. The human led her cautiously through the ruins, his eyes scanning the silence. And then they heard it, voices sharp and cruel. Raiders had taken the ruins as their camp, their banners hanging from the broken towers. And among them were prisoners, weak aliens chained and beaten, their cries faint. The princess froze, her chest tightening. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Weakness must be cast aside, the strong live, the weak die. But then she looked at the prisoners, their eyes filled with despair, and she remembered her own exile. She remembered lying in the dust, abandoned, forgotten, and how the human had chosen to save her. Something inside her snapped. "We must help them," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. The human looked at her, measuring her resolve. "It will not be easy," he warned. "If we fight to the end." She lifted her staff, her eyes steady. "Then we fight." The battle that followed was chaos. The raiders were many, their weapons sharp, their laughter cruel. But the princess no longer fought with fear. She fought with purpose. Every strike of her staff carried not just strength, but defiance. She struck one raider down, then another, her movements sharp and fast, her breath heavy but steady. The human fought beside her, swift and precise, but he let her take the lead, forcing her to prove her courage. The prisoners watched in silence as the abandoned princess fought for them. They had heard the stories of her weakness, but now they saw her rise, bloodied but unbroken. By the time the last raider fled, the ruins echoed with silence once more. The human cut the chains of the prisoners, but it was the princess they looked to, their eyes wide, their voices whispering her name. To them, she was not the abandoned child of a cruel lord. She was the warrior who had saved them. That night, as the fire burned low, the princess sat with the freed prisoners. They spoke to her with gratitude, some even bowing, and her chest ached with a strange feeling she had never known. Respect. For the first time in her life, she was not mocked, not shamed, but honored. She realized then that courage was not just about standing for herself. It was about standing for others. And in that moment, her heart grew stronger than her body. The human sat apart, watching quietly. He said nothing, but inside he knew the truth. The abandoned princess was no longer a shadow of her father's court. She was becoming something far greater, something the galaxy itself could not ignore. And though she could not see it yet, this was the moment her rise truly began. Her courage had turned into a fire that would soon set the stars ablaze. The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars that burned like watchful eyes. The princess sat near the fire, her hands still raw from the last battle, her mind alive with thoughts she could not silence. She had saved the prisoners. She had fought like a warrior, and for the first time, she felt the weight of respect upon her shoulders. But with it came a new fear, for whispers were growing louder, whispers that carried across the empire. Her father had surely heard of her survival, and sooner or later, he would come for her. The human sensed her unease, his eyes sharp in the glow of the flames. "You are no longer hidden," he said. "The world knows you live. The one who cast you out will not stay silent. He will test you. He will break you if you let him." She lowered her gaze, her heart heavy. "My father is stronger than I can ever be. He is feared. He commands armies. I am still just one, just a cast-off." The human leaned closer, his voice steady but unyielding. "Strength is not in the armies you command. Strength is in what you choose when all hope seems lost. You have already risen from the dust. Do not kneel again." His words cut deep, and she carried them with her as they journeyed toward the Empire's heart. The road grew harsher, the lands shifting from barren desert to dark valleys where alien beasts prowled. But she did not falter. Each trial only forged her stronger. By the time they reached the gates of her father's city, she was no longer the same fragile daughter who had once been thrown out. She walked tall, her staff firm in her hands, her eyes unshaken. The city loomed like a fortress of silver and black stone, its towers sharp as blades against the sky. The gates opened slowly, warriors standing on either side, their faces twisted with disbelief as they saw her return. Whispers spread like fire through the streets. "The abandoned one, she has returned, she lives." And though many laughed, there was unease in their eyes, for she did not return broken. She returned standing beside a human whose presence burned with silent strength. Inside the throne hall, the alien lord sat upon his silver seat, his eyes glowing like cold fire. The court was filled with nobles, their voices rising in shock as the princess entered. The lord's gaze fixed upon her, heavy and merciless. "You dare return here?" he thundered, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I cast you out. You were nothing, and now you come crawling back." The princess stood firm, her body trembling but her voice clear. "I did not crawl. I walked. I fought. I survived," she said. "You call me weak, but weakness did not kill me. It made me strong." The hall erupted in whispers, some mocking, some filled with disbelief. The alien lord rose from his throne, his shadow stretching across the hall like a storm. "You are still nothing, and nothing you say will change what you are." Before she could speak, the human stepped forward, his presence like steel. "You are wrong," he said simply, his voice cutting through the noise. "You see weakness where there is strength. You see failure where there is courage. Your daughter is no longer yours to command. She is more than the shadow of your pride." Gasps filled the court. A human, a stranger, speaking against the alien lord. The nobles sneered. Some shouted for his death, but the lord raised a hand, silencing them all. His eyes burned with fury, yet there was unease behind them. He had thought his daughter erased, yet here she stood, stronger than he remembered, standing not alone, but beside someone who dared to defy him. "You would defy me," the lord growled, his voice sharp with rage. The human's gaze did not waver. "I would show you the truth," he said. "She is no longer the cast-off child you abandoned. She is the warrior who will stand against you." The hall grew still, the weight of those words pressing down like thunder. The princess felt her heart pound, fear and courage battling inside her. This was the moment, the confrontation she had feared since the day of her exile. And though her father's shadow still loomed over her, she did not bow. She lifted her staff, her voice strong. "I will not kneel to you. Not now, not ever again." The silence that followed was heavier than any blade. Her defiance rang through the chamber, echoing against the cold walls. The alien lord's eyes narrowed, his fury burning like fire. "You dare challenge me, daughter," he roared. And in that moment, the fate of the princess was sealed. There would be no turning back. The path of confrontation had begun, and the empire itself would tremble at what was to come. The throne hall shook with the alien lord's fury. His voice thundered like a storm as he rose from the silver throne, his towering form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the chamber. "You dare defy me," he roared. "You, who were nothing, you, who I cast aside?" The princess stood firm, her staff gripped tightly in her hands, her body trembling but her voice strong. "I'm no longer nothing. I'm no longer the weak daughter you abandoned. I'm stronger than you ever believed." The court erupted into chaos. Nobles shouting, warriors drawing their weapons, the sound of metal against stone echoing like thunder. But the human stepped forward, calm and unshaken, his presence like a wall of steel. "She does not stand alone," he said, his voice clear. "And if you cannot see the strength she carries, then you are blind to the fire before you." The alien lord's eyes blazed, his fury unchained. "Then prove it," he growled, signaling to his guards. "Let her strength be tested. Let her die here, as she should have long ago." The warriors of the court advanced, their weapons raised, their faces filled with scorn. The princess felt her heart pound, fear rushing through her veins. But this time fear did not control her. She raised her staff, her voice carrying across the chamber. "I will not die weak. I will not die forgotten." The first warrior charged, his blades slicing through the air. She moved faster than she ever had before, blocking with her staff, striking with precision, each blow fueled not just by survival, but by defiance. Another came, larger, stronger, but she did not falter. She drove her weapon into his chest, pushing him back with strength born of fire. The court fell silent, disbelief filling their eyes. The abandoned daughter was fighting like a true warrior. The battle raged, the human striking down those who tried to overwhelm her, but he never stole her fights. He let her stand, let her prove herself before the eyes of the empire. One by one, her father's chosen warriors fell, beaten not by armies, not by power, but by the one they had all called weak. At last, the alien lord himself descended from his throne, his steps shaking the ground, his weapon glowing with the fire of his rank. "You dare shame me before my court?" he roared. The princess tightened her grip, her breath heavy but her eyes unyielding. "You shamed yourself," she answered, her voice steady, "by abandoning me, by refusing to see me. But today, all will see who I truly am." Their clash was thunder. The Lord struck with the strength of a ruler, his blade heavy, his rage burning. But the princess met him strike for strike, her staff cracking against his weapon, sparks flying, her body screaming with pain, yet refusing to fall. Every blow was a test, every block a battle of will. The court watched in stunned silence, their whispers swallowed by the storm before them. At last, with a cry that echoed through the hall, she struck hard, her staff breaking through his guard. The alien lord staggered, his weapon clattering to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. The daughter he had abandoned now stood over him, victorious. The silence was complete, the entire court frozen as the truth burned in their eyes. The human stepped forward, his gaze calm. "She is no longer your weakness," he said, his words cutting through the silence. "She is her own strength. She is legend." The nobles bowed their heads, some in fear, some in respect. The prisoner she had freed had whispered her name before, but now her name rang through the hall, carried on voices that once mocked her. The abandoned daughter was no more. She was the warrior who had risen from exile, the fighter who had faced her father and stood tall. That night, as the city whispered with awe and fear, the princess stood on the high balcony beside the human. She looked out at the empire that once cast her away. The stars stretched endless above them, and for the first time, she felt not small, not broken, but vast. Her legend had begun. It would carry beyond the walls of her father's court, beyond the stars of her world. She was no longer the weak child. She was the fire that would shape the galaxy. And so the tale was born, the tale of the daughter abandoned, the human who stood beside her, and a legend that rose from the ashes of weakness to burn brighter than any throne.